Welcome, everybody. We're live. It's the MongoDB podcast live. We've got a great show lined up for you today. We're going to be focusing on PHP. It's all part of the MongoDB PHP week. We've got a practice with PHP week. It's kicked off all week long. Great week of activities focused on the PHP developer community. And we're going to be sharing some links. Make sure you check the description for links below. You can jump into the event. There's a quest you can participate in. It's at mdb.link/practice-with-php-event. You can jump in, win some prizes. And to help me out with today's office hours, PHP, I'm going to bring Hubert back. Welcome back to the podcast live.
Hello, good morning, and thanks for having me again. I'm looking forward to the show.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, today is a really special day because we've got some amazing guests. You know, we're focusing on PHP all week, so who better than the PHP Driver team at MongoDB? So what do you say we bring those guys in?
Let's do it.
All right, Jeremy, welcome. Jerome and Andreas. It's great to have you guys on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you.
Hi.
Yeah, let's just go through some introductions really briefly. Jeremy, you want to kick off and let folks know who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I've been here about 12 years hiding away on the PHP team. Came for the first driver, hated it so much I stuck around to rewrite it for the second one. So we're about 7 years into the second project. I got to work with Derek Rethens and Hannes early on, and then Andreas came on. I'll hand it over to him. He came over from the Doctrine team, and then most recently Jerome. And every day I'll try to pronounce his name a little bit better. I'll let him.
Okay.
Andreas,
welcome.
Yeah. So I've been using MongoDB for almost as long as Jeremy has been part of MongoDB itself. I've been using the driver, hated the first one, then the next one came out. And I hated the old one so much I decided to rewrite it on top of the new one, just so we could get Doctrine ODM running on PHP 7. And it's still being heavily used to this day, and I wish I could just get rid of it and banish it to the archives. And yeah, then joined MongoDB and enjoyed every single day since, working on the PHP driver. And now we've got Jerome joining the team, focusing mainly on the frameworks that we'll be talking about in a little bit. Yeah. Jerome?
That's great.
Yes,
Jerome?
hello everybody. Yes, I joined the team 6 months ago, and I work mainly on the Laravel integration, which we take over a few months ago. And I'm working with MongoDB for years, and I'm part of the Symfony core team too. So I'm in the Symfony open source ecosystem for a long time, like Jeremy and Andreas.
Great. Well, welcome
I
to the
see.
show. Yeah, go ahead.
I think yesterday, Jerome, you pulled up an old pull request from 2012 where I was working on the Mongo session adapter in Symfony 2.1. It's been a while.
Wow. So there's some major history here. Fantastic. Well, we're going to be going through to start things off. I want to encourage the audience to jump into the comments. Give us your questions. We'll try and get those answered. But while we do that, Hubert, I think we're gonna start with a little, I guess, architecture. Might make sense for us to walk through the architecture of the PHP driver and the extension. So if you want to follow along, all of these links are available. You can visit mdb.link/php-manual, and that's where we're going to start today. So, Jeremy, maybe I'll ask you to walk us through the architecture, maybe give us a start to understand how the MongoDB driver works.
Yeah, do you want to share your screen?
Yeah, sure.
I think you've got the doc page up.
Yeah,
so we have the PHP driver. Yep, we'll start here. This is, I'm not sure if this is the manual link or the PHP-driver link. So you might check the short links. This is our main docs page, the same as the MongoDB server manual and where you find your Atlas documentation. So we have pages for all the drivers. PHP drivers here, and I'll apologize in advance, but it's a little bit confusing in that it's implemented in two parts. So we have a PHP extension, which is written in C, and that's like some of the other extensions, like the OpenSSL extension. A lot of folks use Xdebug. So those are the things you'll install with PECL, or if you're a Windows user, we have DLLs that you can just download. And then separately, we have a PHP library that is a composer package. And you have the option, if you really just want to use the extension, that is the bare bones API, to talk to MongoDB server and run very basic things like queries, commands. But the library is where you add all the higher level stuff. So you have the file system abstraction, a lot of the new features like change streams, Atlas search support for that, and all the higher level command helpers. And so I just want to demonstrate, we can go down to the architecture, but I'll just show how to install these two things really quickly. And so we can jump over to my terminal window.
Oh yeah, hang on. Here we go.
And so I'm on a Linux system, so I'm going to use PECL. So install SF. And I already have this installed, so we're going to do one of those cooking show things where just click the timer, we'll go to the end. But I'll make this a little faster and do make ops. We always forget about that. So this is going to, PECL's not found. Oh, okay, there we go. Just make sure I have an actual PHP version. Okay, it's going to go download the tarball from the PECL website, and then just right into compiling this. And our PECL extension depends on the C driver. So we'll see that in a little bit. We'll come back to this. We just jump over to the architecture and I'll explain what's going on here. So back to the other docs page.
There we
So
go.
it's not very exciting to watch. Okay, so the driver architecture. So at the lower level, the red, and this didn't exist for the old PHP driver when I got here 12 years ago, was just one giant C project, and it was only an extension. There was no composer. Composer didn't exist back then when that first driver was written. That's how old we're going. But when I got here, there also wasn't a C team. So now we have a C team, and they're about 10 years old. And so we have this library called libmongoc, and since we now have the PHP extension we write in C also to do some of the higher performance things like going from PHP arrays back to, or PHP objects back to BSON, which is MongoDB's document structure format. So there's a lot of things that we want to use C for to be performant. And so we build on top of the C driver. So when you install the PECL extension, we bundle the driver with the C driver, so it compiles that with our driver. Then we have a BSON library, and then if you're using queryable encryption or client-side field-level encryption, that's a newer project the last 5 years. That's also another C library. So we ship all those three things available. When you install PECL, you get all three of them. And if you're using a system like Ubuntu or Red Hat, Remy makes Red Hat packages for us for Fedora and CentOS. So he'll use the system libraries instead, but we'll bundle it as well for PECL. So I'm installing that and come back. We can jump back to my screen here. And then I'm going to show you the composer package. So after this is done, depending on your version of PECL, and this isn't our fault, but you might get a seg fault. That's totally fine. But the main thing you want to do is make sure that it's in your INI file. So I'm going to jump into where my INI file is. I'll just show you my INI file. Nothing interesting here. I'm based in New York. I think Andreas is in Munich. I wish we could all just do away with time zones and daylight savings, but that's above my pay grade. Extension down here, this is what you want to have. And if you're running PHP locally, I think one of our most common, so common that we have an FAQ now in the library documentation for this, which we'll show you guys later. But the most common problem is you have a CLI environment, you have your web server, there's different PHP INI files. So you want to make sure that the extension is loaded in the correct one and that you compiled it for the right, if you have different PHP versions installed. And sometimes people have like MAMP or WAMP on Windows, or on Mac, you might have a PHP that ships with Mac and you have one from Homebrew. So make sure you're compiling and running it, the SO file you compile, make sure it's for the right PHP version. And so we have some tools and FAQs to help people figure that out. But to install PHP, just to show you the extension is installed, we go back here, back to my top directory. And if we do PHPi, this is everything in PHPi. So I just want to show you the stuff from Mongo. So this is showing the PHP info output. We've got the extension name, and I'm just grepping here to cut back, but you'll see the version is reported here. We compiled with libmongoc, the C driver, and that ships. So our version in the C driver is a little bit different, but it'll tell you what version you compiled with, what SSL library, do we have libmongocrypt installed, some compression stuff, and these are all things that get detected when we build the driver. So this is what you want. If you don't see any of this, you probably don't have the extension loaded, and you're just going to get some missing classes. So that's kind of the first thing to check after you install with Peckle is make sure PHP info reports that the extension's there. And then after this, we're just going to install the composer package as well. And it depends on the extension. So if that's not there, this will complain. And then this is a much quicker operation. And then it's going to set up your composer. It's just a new project here. So the only thing I'm requiring right now is the driver and the library. And so these are both available. I can start writing a PHP app. We can go back to the architecture. And Andreas and Jerome, we have in the library repository, we have some example apps to kind of get you kickstarted to use some of the driver features. So what I just installed here, the first thing that took a little while was the blue row. And then over to the green, the composer package. And once you've got the composer package, now you're writing your app. And this is everything in green is written in PHP. Everything in blue and red is written in C. And so when we get contributions and stuff, a lot of people like to contribute to the library or the doctrine. Integrations is up there as well, and that's Laravel. ODMs would be something like doctrine. And some of these would be integrated in the PHP library. I'll let Jerome talk about this later, but he's also working on a new query builder, which would be another one of these green boxes that's going to sit on top of the library until it's ready to get merged in.
So you kind of hinted at it, but why the two parts? Why are we still depending on a C extension?
So for our personal sanity, we could write everything in C, and that would be kind of a nightmare for some of the things that we take for granted as a PHP developer, where you get to write PHP, like working with callbacks. If you want to send in an anonymous function or callback to some API, which we have for like our transaction helper to run transactions. Doing that in pure PHP on the C side is a lot more code is necessary to write, and there's a lot more propensity for it's a foot gun where if you screw things up in PHP, you get a nice exception. If you screw things up in C, you probably get hard to debug seg faults, and as well as just maintainability. It's harder for it to be easier for us to iterate and develop new features in PHP and keep the higher level stuff that really has no performance reason to be written in C. So we'll use that in PHP, and then it's more accessible also to our users if they want to dive into the code and see how things work.
Yeah. Okay. So unfortunately, my browser's frozen. I'm gonna cut out, and I'll be right back.
Okay.
So maybe now is a good time to ask the audience what kind of apps they're working on. So if you're watching this live right now, let us know in the comments what type of PHP apps you're working on, and I'm very curious about that. I've heard some developers asking about the comparison between the performance between like the PHP driver and let's say the C# and other drivers. Could you give us some insights into that?
So, I think Andreas is well suited to answer this. He just worked on benchmarking.
Yes. Yeah. So performance is always a bit of a tricky thing because you can't really compare two drivers between different versions. That said, obviously, there are some big performance sinks. So anything that encodes your PHP objects into Beason or decodes them from Beason, that's going to be very performance intensive. And that's one of the reasons why we built that on the C driver and have that in native C code, because a lot of times that is much more efficient, much faster than if we rewrote that in PHP. On the other hand, it's a lot more painful since C is by far not as high level as PHP. But for a recent example, we did a bunch of improvements in the Beason library and added or exposed raw Beason classes, so you could work with Beason objects directly without having to decode them into PHP. And we saw some performance difference between running them in PHP and C that amount to a factor of, I think it was around 20, which we discovered by accident when I forgot to optimize the iterator. So those kind of things are a lot more efficient in C, and one of the reasons why we keep using the C driver. Now, for anybody who's done PHP for a while, they might know, yes, we could use FFI. We also tested that, but it's still slower by a factor of 5 than compiling it natively in C. So that's why we stick with that.
Cool. So from a practical standpoint, do you think developers should pick a language based on performance, or in general, it's up to their own productivity?
Up to a certain degree, yes, they should look at performance for a programming language. But in the end, of course, I could say, well, C is a lot faster, so I'm going to build my web application in C. Well, yes, the web application might be faster, but I'm also going to take like 5 years until I get something basic set up, which is obviously where PHP comes in, because it's absolutely suited for web applications, but also CLI applications. So as with every question, the answer is it depends. If you're going to do a lot of parallel processing, PHP is probably not the right choice.
Cool. So we have a question from YouTube, and I pasted it in the private chat. But so Hamed is asking, do we have any package links Mongoose in PHP?
Like Mongoose. Yeah. So that's what we were referring to earlier. There is the Doctrine MongoDB ODM, which is essentially offers you similar functionality as Mongoose. So it maps your documents from the database to objects that you use in your application. It's usually used in the Symfony ecosystem, but Doctrine isn't completely coupled to Symfony, so you can use it outside of a Symfony application as well. It allows you to define your schema, so to speak, so you map fields from your documents to properties in your objects. It brings a query builder, and it takes care of all of the transactional logic of saving changes to the database. If you're using Laravel, then you would use the Laravel integration, which integrates into Eloquent. So you get to use all of the tools that you usually use when you build Laravel applications, and it will feel totally familiar, while also having all of the advantages of MongoDB.
Yeah. Great.
Cool. So while I was browsing the PHP forums in our community website, I noticed that a common pitfall is that people try to use MongoDB, and for some reason the MongoDB extension is not loaded. And sometimes it's because they try to use several versions of PHP at the same time. So how should they keep an eye on that, and how to handle it?
I could feel this. So if you want to try and call up the FAQ and the docs, we can try to do that. But in the PHP library docs, we do have an FAQ that touches on this. So I've answered this way too many times in GitHub issues. But it comes down to figuring out what your PHP binary is. If you have multiple PHP installations, they will probably each have a different version of Peckle. And Peckle itself depends on some other tools that ship with PHP, like PHP IZE, PHP IZE. And this is the thing that builds your extension into that .so file that you then load in your ini file. So if you, on your environment, you should always know, what is my PHP binary? How many of them do I have installed? And for each one, what is the ini file that it's loading? And so if you want to scoot up above, we can jump, just scroll up a little bit. over to the docs and a little bit higher, and documentation library. Let's just jump in there. I'll just show you exactly where this is. So the extension docs are all on PHP.net, and that's by convention because that's where PECL extensions tend to get documented. But the library is what we expect most people to use this directly. So most people should probably start here, and this tells you when you need. It refers to the driver document, the extension documentation when you need to. If you go to FAQ in the left-hand column, common installation errors. So multiple PHP runtimes installed. Another one is with Windows, people sometimes get the wrong DLL file, which is the Windows equivalent of having multiple PHP runtimes. And but if we could jump down to multiple PHP runtimes, and there's some scripts that we reference here. And I tell you what kind of PHP functions to run to see what INI files you have, and this kind of walks through the debugging process. So the first thing I would say, we'd start with this FAQ, read this carefully, walk down, type in the code, try and see what you can figure out, and then if you still need help, then you're in a better position to write a more helpful issue when you report it, and then we can investigate it further. But it's INI files and your PHP paths. That's really what it comes down to.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. Yeah, sometimes I just fire info, like a PHP info, and take a look, see.
Yeah, and
as well.
While we're here, I'll also say server selection failures. If we just jump down there, a very common exception in the driver is not being able to connect to a server for any number of reasons. Some people, they have SE Linux enabled and their PHP process can't make an outgoing connection. Sometimes they're using Atlas and they haven't set up the IP access list.
We just had this morning.
Outside. Yes, this is probably, if you're on, this is probably constantly coming in. So a server selection failure, that's one exception in the driver. And another important thing is, so people will go through the GitHub issues and see that segment of the same exception message and not realize the details of the exception are actually entirely different than this other person with the same exception. So this FAQ section goes through with a server selection failure. How do I make sense of that exception message and figure out, is it because my SSL certificates aren't validated? Is it because of I can't make an outgoing network connection? That's another thing to look into and be aware of when you're starting a new application.
Great.
Cool. Okay. That's good advice.
So I want to remind the folks. Oh yeah, go ahead, Jeremy.
I just want to know if you do have the example apps tab open. I don't know if
I do.
Jerome or Andreas wanted to show some actual code of what the driver looks like. So hand this over to Andreas if you like.
Sure. So we can take a look at a relatively straightforward one, which would also tie in with my next one. Let's open aggregate.php, which we can then also talk a little bit about aggregation pipeline. So aside from the utility code, if you scroll down a little bit more, you can see the first thing we do is we connect to a new client. In this case, you can either define an environment variable where you put the client URI in, or you use the default URI to a local MongoDB, but the client object is your main entry point. And this is one of the cool things about MongoDB drivers, is that this API is the same in every single driver. So if you've used the Java driver, the .NET driver, or any other driver, you will know the API already. So line 23, we create a new client. We then fetch a collection that we call aggregate from the test database. We use some PHP magic properties to get that. We then drop it just to make sure it's clean, and we insert many documents. And here I will just say this is a lot nicer than SQL, where we just do insert into and blah, blah, blah. But here we already have an expressive API that tells the developer exactly what we're doing. We're inserting many documents that we've previously assembled. And then we construct an aggregation pipeline. Now, aggregation pipelines are great. I absolutely love them, and I've been using them for a long time. But when you haven't used them yet, this looks strange. And your IDE, unfortunately, doesn't really help you build this kind of code. So we'll show something that we're working on currently in a little bit. But we define this pipeline. In this case, we just group data and create some sums and get max and min values. And then if you scroll down a little bit further, we then call the aggregate method on the collection. We aggregate the pipeline, and we get a result cursor that gives us all of the documents that are returned from this aggregation pipeline. In this case, only a single one, because we're just grouping by a null ID. So we get one document with a total count field, an even count field, odd count field that contains all of the logic. But it's relatively straightforward. The methods have nice names, and they're pretty self-explanatory. But then if you click through it in your IDE, you will get documentation about it.
Yeah, I'm gonna hide this banner. Hang on. Let's see.
Yeah, it's hiding a little bit of the code. So.
Yeah. There we go. Okay. Hope you can see that code at the bottom there.
Correct. And so this will return an object. So each document is typically represented as an object where you can access properties. There are ways to configure this using type maps, which we documented, and we have a few tutorials on how to do this, which you can do if you use the driver directly. But obviously, if you use Laravel or the Doctrine MongoDB LDM, it handles this for you, and you don't need to worry about how you can unserialize this kind of data into your business objects.
We do have a question. Let's pull that up. We're going to hide a little bit of the code, but how do you configure the Laravel package to use MongoDB? Is that something we want to jump into, or shall?
Sure. I would hand it off to Jerome.
Yeah, you could show the repository at least.
Yeah. And Jerome, maybe you want to explain a little bit?
Yes.
Your last few months.
If you can show the repository. The database connection for MongoDB with Laravel is very, very close to other SQL database. It's because the MongoDB Laravel package is made on top of Eloquent, which is the ORM for Laravel. And so you can create a new connection which is named MongoDB. Do you have? Yes, his repository, and in the docs there is install. Yes. So once you install the package, the provider is usually not necessary to configure, because Laravel 10 has this automatic configuration for package. And if you scroll down, you can see in the config database.php, you have this connection with and you can add the new MongoDB connection. And what is very important is to modify the default database, the default connection. Otherwise, you have to specify the connection in each model you are using. With MongoDB. So if you have,
so it's creating the configuration element for the DB connection for MongoDB, and then specifying that as the default.
Yes.
And the DB DSN environment variable, that corresponds to, that's going to be your connection string that you get from Atlas or locally.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this means also something which is interesting here is that you can use several databases. You can use MySQL and MongoDB in the same project, and you can start using MongoDB for some parts of your project while still using MySQL for the existing parts.
Powerful.
And I'll add that we have a couple of really good tutorials as well, and I'm going to paste the links in the chats on YouTube and LinkedIn.
Yep. And just want to cover this, another question from the same listener, where to get the DSN. That's your Atlas connection string. So from within Atlas, when you're in the databases tab, you can click the overview tab and then connect. And you're going to want to use the driver connection type. And you'll see you'll need to provide your credentials to do that. It'll be the SRV record. Hope that helps. All right. Is there a way to use watchers on collection?
So I think this is referring to change streams.
Mm-hmm.
We do have that in. I'm not sure if we have any. We certainly have a code. Do we have a code example?
There's a code example that you can walk through.
Go back to the second tab.
Yep. Change stream.
There
we go.
So we can scroll down to where we construct the client. These all kind of start off the same way. And I don't know if you want to hide Chris's question.
Oh yeah, let me do that. Yep, good call.
So in this case, we're connecting to whatever the URI is, and in this case, the default is probably not accurate because change streams require replica sets, so you wouldn't be connecting to a standalone on localhost probably.
Right. So it wouldn't be 127.
But yeah, that's just boilerplate code here. But
Yep.
we create a new collection, we drop it, we insert some documents just like the previous example, insert many, and then on line 42, and sorry, actually on line 32, after we create the collection, we create the change stream.
Yeah.
That's fine. We create the change stream, and this is similar to a cursor, but it's going to kind of more longer lived, and new documents are going to appear in it. We can continue iterating it as the lifetime of the script goes on. So we create the change stream, and then we insert the documents, and then we start iterating the change stream. And for a change stream, since the iteration is in piecemeal, we're not using for each constructs like you would for a cursor, because with the change stream, when you get to the end, that's the end right now, but you might want to continue iterating. You might want to sleep or do some other task and then come back and continue iterating. So here we do manual iteration, and this is where both the cursor and the change stream are PHP iterators. So in addition to for each, you can directly say next, valid, rewind. And so the while true, we're going to use that to just continually go in a loop. And this is a contrived example. A lot of people will run change streams maybe in like a CLI script. It doesn't really make sense to run a change stream in something that's responding to a web request, I don't think, because the goal of that is to quickly assemble a response to the user and move on to the next request. But we're using PHP in the CLI mode and doing long-running scripts. That's where change streams really shine. So from the whole block of line 46 down to the end of the script, so long as there is a valid document, we'll access it, we'll make sure it's a document, and we'll print it out, and then we'll advance to the next one. And we'll just continue doing this in a loop and then I think we do this only for 3 seconds. And that's because we run these example scripts in CI, so we don't want to consume our GitHub action time limit. So for 3 seconds, we'll just iterate through the change stream, and you could obviously change the condition at the end to iterate as you like. But it's just the only learning piece here is just how do you invoke iterators directly, and you can do the same thing with a cursor. We're doing cursor, valid, current, true, use the same iterator methods. So yeah, if you want to get started with this, you could just run the script locally, point it towards, you could use Atlas and create a free cluster, which is a replica set. So you don't have to set up MongoDB locally. And you should be able to run the script and tinker with it and be a starting point for an application.
Great. Well, encouraging the listeners, or the viewers, to put your questions in the comments here. You can also jump into the community and ask them there. So, Jeremy, what are some other common issues that you see coming in?
I can tell you, I'm delighted to not be focusing on this, but Jerome has been constantly dealing with, since we took over the Laravel project, the library went for a few years where it had less maintenance than it probably needed, given the number of users that work with it. But in contrast to Doctrine, which was written with MongoDB in mind, the Laravel integration is written on top of Eloquent, which is designed for a relational database. And so there are a bunch of hurdles, which I think none of us had worked with Eloquent before, that on a daily basis, you're probably discovering new challenges or new API decisions from having to integrate with a relational database first API. And maybe Jerome could speak a little bit more to that, but we all keep up with the GitHub issues that come in, and I'm just thankful that Jerome takes most of them, because it's there's a huge learning curve.
Yeah, so it's very seamless for people which already are using Eloquent and with Laravel. We try to make things very, very easy, and I think that the integration is quite good, because there is a lot of users for this library, and we have relation between collection. We have relation between MongoDB collection and relational database. We have embed documents. We have a lot of things like behave a lot like a relational database. But on top of that, we try to bring new features that are very specific to MongoDB, and which are the reason why you want to use MongoDB and not a legacy database. yes, it's challenging sometimes, and hopefully there is a lot of contributors which are very good at Laravel, which come and contribute to the project to bring their ideas and solve issues, and so help us to develop.
Thank you, Hans. Hans just this week, a guy seemingly came out of nowhere and started submitting a whole bunch of pull requests on old issues. And also the community maintainers, Divine is another one that for the number of years that was just a couple of community folks that were helping out other users and when they had time working on issues.
So when Andreas and I were in Lisbon for Laracon last year, we met some developers who wanted to use the package, but were waiting for official support. And I think that right now with Jerome on it, it can't get any more official than that.
So we do have another question, if we want to take a look at it. Looking to store and process data from ICP and XRF equipment. They're both using JSON, and Anna is wondering if she should continue to use Python or should she learn PHP? You're talking to a bunch of PHP developers, so there might be a bias here. But
I would quote some PHP developers on Twitter that would say at this age, there's no need to learn PHP. There are probably better languages to learn. But if you're using PHP, and so definitely in this case, if you're familiar with Python, there's no, I don't think you need to complicate. Use the tools that you know, unless you hit a roadblock.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. MongoDB is great because it does support so many languages in an idiomatic fashion. So if you're using a language, the drivers have been constructed so that it's just comfortable for you. If you know Python, it's easy to use Python with MongoDB. If you know PHP, same. Yeah. Hope that helps.
Yeah. I mean, learning a new programming language never hurts. But unless you have a specific use case where you want to use PHP and where PHP shines a lot more than Python, I'd say just keep using Python for what you're currently doing. Aside from personal preference, we've all been doing PHP for, I think, more than 10 years at this point. There's no point to kid ourselves that there's, languages for everything. Like I said before, you wouldn't use C for a web application.
I will say both the Python and PHP drivers at MongoDB, I don't have the stats to back this up right now. I could go through Jira and run a query, but I think we have some of the lowest bug report numbers.
Yes.
They're both very stable drivers, and been around for a while. The teams are both have excellent teams on there. So if I had to use another driver, I would definitely look at the Python driver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So another question. Nowadays, with Laravel 10, do you consider that Eloquent is stable, or do you recommend using an alternative?
Try not to get in trouble. Make a very diplomatic answer here.
Yeah.
So you just had a BC.
I mean, I think Eloquent has been stable from the beginning, in terms of it's a data access layer that stores your data and typically doesn't lose it, which I think for a database layer is quite an important distinction. Obviously, it changes. It might have some bugs. It keeps evolving, which introduces new bugs. But in general, if you're doing Laravel, I think Eloquent is the best tool you should use at that point, because any new developer that you add to the project will know Eloquent. So if you roll your own ODM or if you use Doctrine ODM, that is not very prevalent in the Laravel ecosystem. So if you're looking for a Laravel engineer, chances are they'll know Eloquent and most likely not many other tools. Of course, it depends on what you need, what your preference is. We could go into flame wars about active record versus data mapper patterns. I don't think there's a point there. So unless there's a personal preference for you, I'd say stick with what your framework offers you.
But flames are fun.
Yeah.
So I want to ask the viewers, the listeners, what kind of applications are you developing today? What are you using PHP for? And if you're watching, if you're interested, why are you here? Do you have questions? Are you sitting on something that you need help with? So ask those in the comments. Hubert, what's next?
Okay, what's next for Windows users? What's the what are the options to set
There's
up?
dozens of us. There's dozens of us.
Yeah.
I'm one of them.
So options to set up a PHP environment on Windows.
Yes.
Okay.
Um,
I'm happy to take this one. So
yeah, go ahead.
There was, I mean, you're going to like the answer, but I think working in a virtual machine is a great idea. Or most of the Windows developers that I remember from conferences, it's been a few years since I made it out to one. But they were using, think of like Chris Tankersley, he was using Docker at the time, and he also ran Windows. I know a lot of folks now are using WSL, is the acronym right? Windows Linux Subsystem?
Yeah.
WLS? I don't know.
No, WSL.
I would be careful. I personally would be careful with the WAMPs and the MAMPs and those bundle packages. And I think Laravel Herd is now this for macOS, or makes it very easy to switch between PHP versions. Those are a lot of the users using those platforms where they install MAMP or WAMP on Windows, and they get a PHP bundle, and it comes bundled with the web server Apache. It comes with MySQL. They add Mongo to it. Those are a lot of users where they end up getting really confused about where's my PHP binary, where's the PECL command, or where's my PHP INI file. Because those tools make it really easy to get started with just install something and get a web server running with PHP, and you can start writing code. But once you have to install PHP extensions and copy the DLL files, that's where things get a bit trickier. And so the thing I would suggest starting with is windows.php.net has Windows builds, and you'll just download a version of PHP compiled by the PHP team. You get your php.exe file and start with that and learn to use that, and learn how to run PHP info and your INI files, and start with the built-in web server on PHP. We use that a lot for our own testing, and that is the easiest way to, even when we ask people to reproduce bugs, we always say, can you start off with just the PHP web server? I want to rule out that anything in Apache or Nginx is to blame, or PHP FPM, and just focus on the extension in PHP, and then we'll take it from there. Go out. But yeah, with Windows, I would say just don't forget about learning how PHP actually works by itself. I know it's convenient to grab something off the shelf if you have to get ready, but once you hit a roadblock, you might be worse off. You'll be at the mercy of their forums, or which have different levels of interactivity.
Yeah,
and we don't use
I
these
think
tools,
I
so
think
it's
that's
harder
very
for us to
solid
help you.
advice. Yeah, it's very solid advice. I tried WAMP, I tried Laragon, and personally these days I use Docker. And the reason why I like this is because I can make it compatible with GitHub code spaces, and that way you can have people try your app with one click, start adding PRs very easily without having to do their own setup locally. So.
I think the three of us all juggle multiple PHP versions. I've been on Ubuntu for years, and I don't use the Ubuntu packages for PHP. I just build PHP from source, because we have to jump through all the different PHP versions when we do development. And there's a beautiful simplicity to just PHP binary and the INI file, and you just know exactly how it works before you add the extra layers of complexity on it.
Yeah.
But we also have the privilege of we're not running companies on PHP or deploying applications anymore. So.
Yeah, I think it's easy to, if you're just trying to get started, I think it's very tempting to jump in with like a WAMP or a MAMP, but it does complicate things. So there's another question. Does MongoDB use Lucene index for indexing data? Great question. Who wants to take that one? I mean, I'm happy to weigh in. MongoDB has a new feature in the Atlas platform. It's called Atlas Search. It's based on Lucene, and it simplifies the process of indexing your data for full text search. So it's built right into the Atlas UI. You can create a Lucene-based index on your text data and leverage all of the features of Lucene right from within your MongoDB data without having to spin up a separate Lucene infrastructure and syncing the data, ETLing the data between. So it's really, really powerful. And if you're a MongoDB podcast listener, you'll have heard a recent episode with Bianca Leasley and Jakub Lazinski where we talked about Atlas CLI. So if you want to leverage Lucene as a part of your application, I would highly recommend it. First of all, every application needs good search. The new Atlas CLI feature enables you to deploy a local instance of MongoDB using the command line interface. And as a bonus, you can actually deploy a Lucene index against that data right on your local machine. You don't have to go through Atlas in the cloud. You can do this all locally. So you kind of get the benefit of building out your development environment, leveraging the same access patterns that you will when you deploy your application to production. So check out the Atlas CLI and check out the MongoDB podcast. You can find it at mongodb.com/podcast to hear all about that. So I don't know if anybody has anything else to add to that.
I wish we had that when I was still building PHP apps, because that was the typical use case. We use Doctrine, and you add some event subscribers that duplicate a bunch of data to a Lucene provider or some other search provider. So having that built into MongoDB Atlas and just being able to query for like full text search using an aggregation pipeline, that is some great stuff. So
really powerful. Yeah. There's a question about an online exam system. Oh yeah, go ahead, Jerome.
Sorry, we can show the example how to use the search.
Oh, I'd like that. Where am I going?
In the library example.
Okay, let's get that up.
Yes, you have an example on Atlas Search. A second example. It's quite new because you can now create index and from PHP Driver, and so if you scroll down, you can see that we can create an index. So just let's go down.
Mm-hmm.
We get the collection here. So here we drop the index just to clean for this example. And yes, one thing which is very important is it's not totally inside the core of MongoDB. So it's actually a side service inside MongoDB Atlas. So operation as asynchronous. Most of the operation with using the MongoDB driver are synchronous. So the result is instantaneous when you get the response. But with the indexes, you send the command to create the index, and then you have to wait 1 or 2 minutes for the index to be created. So we have a little helper in this example at the end. We have a little helper to wait for the index to be created.
Sorry, I'm kind of scrolling around here. Apologize. Where are we creating the index?
Go. Scroll down.
Mm-hmm.
You can scroll down. Yes, link 75.
Oh, here we go. Yeah. There we go.
Create the index. And define a mapping. It's the Lucene mapping.
Beautiful.
Jerome, we need an M10 cluster to run that, right?
Yes, it's not available in shared clusters.
Okay.
This is
just in case someone tries one.
The search feature is available from the free shared cluster, but if you want to create from the driver, you need the
dedicated.
You need a M10 cluster.
Okay.
And this has to do with how there's like an extra process that runs that syncs the data, that keeps Lucene and syncs it between the corresponding MongoDB server.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not something that's really accessible if you're on the free shared service.
Right. Beautiful.
And then I'd say on line 100, that's using the aggregation pipeline for the $search operator.
Mm-hmm.
And is this a lead into the query builder? I don't know if you have anything to present there, because that's what Jerome has most been working on recently.
That'd be great.
I don't have an example for $search, but I can show what we're doing
just with the
pipelines.
query builder. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure.
You want to share your screen? Is that?
Yeah, if you
Yep.
hand over screen share. So what I have here is an aggregation pipeline. This is written in JavaScript, so I can paste it into the shell. Also, I usually create these using MongoDB Compass because it makes it a bit easier to debug what's going on. But once you have the pipeline, you would convert this to PHP, have it in your app, but it's not very easy to read and change in future. So what we're currently working on is an aggregation pipeline builder that helps you, especially when you use an IDE, and allows you to group stuff into methods and give it properly accessible names. So for example, here, I can see, okay, we're adding change prices, we're unwinding something, and then we're creating the final document. So I already have a rough idea of what this, which is exactly the same pipeline, is doing. Whereas, if I look at this, I'm going to have to do the cognitive load or take the cognitive load of figuring out what's this code doing. So that is already one big advantage. But the other thing is we're using some modern PHP features to make it look more like actual queries. Use proper identifiers and not just strings in arrays that you would use in PHP. And it's also a lot easier to add new things because you have code completion. If you use an IDE like PHP Storm in this case, you could just say, we want to add a new expression, and it already lists a whole bunch of stuff that you can put in here. If you use GitHub Copilot, it tries to be smarter than you. Can work, can't work sometimes. And once you have sort array, it gives you proper documentation. It's probably a little small on the screen, the tool hint, but it gives you proper documentation about what arguments it will take. So it makes it a lot easier for you to create aggregation pipelines in your code, and then test them as well. So you can run them locally. You can unit test them by just making sure that they produce correct output. So this is a work in progress. We're still working on this. There is a separate repository that is public, but we don't advertise it yet since there's still a lot of work to do. So maybe we can link that.
And it does entail a lot of generated code. Jerome painstakingly went through the MongoDB documentation and also kind of consulting the server docs and extracted all of the docs for the aggregation pipeline operators. And those are now converted into YAML and JSON, and now they get generated into PHP code.
Yes.
And now we're in the process of kind of like backfilling and writing integration tests for all these operators. But it's, the goal was to support everything in the MongoDB documentation, which also gave us a good realization of bad design mistakes for the last 10 years of the aggregation pipeline, where certain operators can be called with different parameters or all these edge cases that we've been handling.
So one thing I'll mention, since you said generated code, this code is generated not in runtime, but in our packaging process. So there is no performance penalty to that. But if you see just the amount of operators we have, obviously, if you were to write all of this by hand, it gets tiring after a little while. So what we instead have is like around 6,000 lines of YAML configs and a nice code generator that does this. So when we want to change something that pretty much affects every single operator, we just change the generator itself and regenerate all of the code. And that does it for us. And also there's a system in there that allows libraries like the Doctrine ODM or the Eloquent integration to change how some of these stages are converted to BSON and sent to the server. For example, Doctrine ODM allows you to rename fields in your objects, and in your queries, it changes the name back. So you would query by property name and it changes to like a short field name. So that stuff can be done in this aggregation pipeline builder as well. We're going to be working on this. We plan to release it early next year. And it's going to be cool. We'll also integrate it into the Laravel integration as well. It's going to be fully available there. So.
And how does it feel to be using these PHP features? I know you've been waiting a very long time to do so.
Oh, it's beautiful. I mean, named arguments, yes, really cool. The match operator, really cool. We're working hard to get rid of PHP 7 completely. We recently got rid of PHP 5. Obviously, we still have some bigger customers that are on these older versions, but we slowly get to move to modern PHP. But I just love the way it looks with named arguments and being able to use variadics for custom fields as named arguments. I think it just feels a lot better than writing an array that, looks like I can't type today. So, I mean, this is just old-style PHP. This looks a lot better, to my eye at least.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, we're coming up on time. I'm tempted to put you on the spot and ask you guys for a crafty trivia question. I want to give away a podcast T-shirt. We got a number.
I used to host Jeopardy. Are you sure you want to do this?
How about one that's not too hard? Ask a question. I'll identify somebody in the comments with the correct answer at random, and we'll give away a podcast T-shirt. If you got a question you'd like to ask,
so we have to ask the questions.
Yeah, well, we got to come up with something. I'm tempted to make it fairly easy. Like, I don't know. What are the 2 components you must install in order to leverage PHP with MongoDB? How about that?
That's an easy one. Everybody should get that.
Okay. All right. So what are the two things that you need to install? We covered this at the outset of the live stream. There are two components that you must install in order to leverage MongoDB with PHP. Go ahead and put your answers in the comments. We'll identify someone at random and we'll reach out, get you a code for a MongoDB podcast t-shirt. You can tune into the MongoDB podcast. We do 2 episodes every week. MongoDB.com/podcast. Let's see. Yeah, let's get rid of that. Thanks. All right. It's been a great discussion, folks. Anything else we want to add before we begin to break?
Yeah, so I'll add, we're also very busy at conferences. We typically try to show up at the big framework conferences. So if you see me there, luckily I have my red hair that makes me stand out a little bit in the crowds. Jerome and I will be at SymphonyCon in Brussels early in December. I'm also going to be doing a workshop on how to work with MongoDB and Symfony. So if you haven't signed up for that yet and you think that's going to be helpful to you, get your boss to pay for a conference ticket. They should really spring it out for you. And we'll also make an appearance at Laracon EU in Amsterdam in February, I think. Yes, I think that's early February. So we'll be there for some more questions.
Right. Jeremy, any plugs?
Nothing off the top of my head. I haven't had breakfast yet, so I'm mentally just. This is water, though. This is not coffee.
Plug your podcast?
I don't have. So
Jamie Kohler reporting live.
I used to go to conferences. I used to go to PHP conferences and do PHP Jeopardy and do talks and do WorstCon, do hot dog hats and everything. Do I have any hot dogs around here? No. That's how I won this thing. And COVID happened, and then I'm stuck in my apartment, and we have a toddler now. So now I just make podcasts and video stuff on my phone. And some of them go into our work Slack. Some of them go directly on Twitter. There's a YouTube channel. There's a Dropbox directory with audio recordings. So
how can people find you?
I sprinkled these everywhere. Just Jay McCall everywhere, a little cartoon character. And feel free to reach out if you ever want to know more. But if you've got time to waste, I've got a lot of original content to share.
There's also stuff like Pringles tastings that we did.
Pringles tasting. We did do Pringles tastings.
Yeah.
What IDE are we using? I'm hanging in there with Sublime Text.
I'm a proud PHP Storm user for almost a decade now. Wouldn't miss it for the world.
Jerome?
Yes, PHP Storm also. And PHP Storm has a database panel which supports MongoDB. So it's not as good as Compass, but it's quite good.
Mm-hmm.
And well integrated with PHP Storm.
We should put JetBrains on the spot here and tell them to integrate Compass into their IDEs.
All right, Hubert, any last words?
Yeah, so I'd like to thank everyone who tuned in, and I want to send them to the Wilco quest. So we have a PHP quest that we're running, in which you can win great swag, Atlas credits, and the more important, rubber ducky. So if you don't have the MongoDB rubber ducky,
I got to interrupt. Hubert, you're on the DevRel team. What do we have to do to get MongoDB to make elephants?
We've got to do it.
I need to find out.
Yeah,
okay,
we need people to want them. So if you want a nice bright green MongoDB elephant, tell the DevRel team that they should get some made. Yeah,
because there's money. I've seen their budget. They've got some money.
Oh, I think now we're cutting the live stream.
All right, so we're gonna answer the question. Jack, you got it right. Jack War. It is the
Jack
library.
War. Oh, yeah. FreeBSD
that's a name
user.
I've seen.
Wow.
That's a name I've seen very often in the MongoDB community forums. Answers half the questions in PHP that I can't get to. So thank you very much, sir.
Well, fantastic. Well, Jack, you just won a MongoDB podcast t-shirt. I'll be reaching out. Watch for that LinkedIn connection request. And folks, thanks so much. This has been a great stream. One last call for the visitors. Check the resources. There are links in the show description. Click those links. Jump in there. Join the quest. We've got a lot of great things happening this week with PHP and MongoDB. Thanks, everybody.
There's the hot dog.
I mean, to be fair, it was Halloween was 3 days ago. So,
Right.
all right.
That's the Jeremy we
All
know
right.
and love.
All right, guys. I'm gonna ask.
Thanks.
I'm gonna ask the guests. You guys hang out just a little bit so we can download the rest of the video. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.